Virtuos Art Studio, Shanghai, China. I oversaw a vast amount of external contract development. One company that I visited was called Virtuos, located in Shanghai, China. I was in search of an art and animation studio that could take on work from our internal development teams because, well, we were short on art resources and work capacity, and Virtuos was such a company. By the way, they spelled their name incorrectly so that they would be noticed. I always thought it was weird. They spelled it Virtuos. They were just missing a U. It should have been Virtuous. So literally they just missed a U. It was silly, but it actually got a lot of attention, so it did work. What was Virtuos's origin? Virtuos was a spin-off by an ex-Ubisoft executive from France that operated in the Ubisoft Canadian French Quebec province office. Although there was no correlation between Ubisoft and Virtuos, the founder held Ubisoft philosophies close and he strove to run Virtuos similarly. Of course, Virtuos was not the same as Ubisoft. It could not be. It was based in Shanghai, China. My adventures in China were wild and scary at times. We'll talk more on that later. Well, headed to China. I was traveling with Mike Crump, a senior development director at the time. He would be the day-to-day supervisor over our contractors should we sign them. Mike and I finally arrived at Shanghai International Airport. Aside from the insanity of people everywhere, it was like a zoo, like an anthole or a beehive. It was madness. There were a few notable things at the airport and of going through Chinese immigration and customs. Two things stood out to me. One, there were temperature scanners. There were automated temperature scanners looking for people with elevated body temperatures, which may indicate that they were sick and they needed to be triaged and potentially detained. And there were happy spectrum buttons upon exiting immigration interview areas. It was a big kiosk with 5 smiley face buttons. Each button had a progressively happier smiley face starting from a frowning unhappy face. Atop the kiosk was a sign in many languages simply asking that each person press the button that reflected their experience in the airport. The journey to the hotel for Mike and I was uneventful. We had taken a taxi with our address pre-printed on a sheet of paper, which we had shown the driver. He read it and he knew precisely where to take us. Easy. As we checked into the hotel, the clerk informed us that although we had internet in our room, we should be very careful not to go to inappropriate sites. Places that might be okay outside of China may not be okay here. He stressed to us that it was illegal to go to any anti-China or pornographic sites, period. It seemed odd that our checking introduction in a hotel included warning us about Chinese threat about internet usage, or rather our inappropriate internet usage. The clerk noted that he could call taxis or provide any general service that we required. We needed only ask him. Again, other than the threat of bad internet usage, everything was easy and straightforward. Mike and I had a few days without schedules or any commitments. We had planned to wander the local streets around our hotel and see the real world of China. We planned to eat at local restaurants, shop at local retailers. We actually learned it was funny, Shanghai is very capitalist, even has an area that's like Beverly Hills, California, super expensive. We would walk the neighborhoods and see how people lived. We would visit gas stations and service outlets to see how they operated. For example, we learned that gas stations were all underground with just pump handles retracted up from the ground. We went to supermarkets and grocery stores to see how things were arranged and presented. We went to a mall to observe how they were all set up? How did they compare to the United States or to Canada? And of course, we intended to buy souvenirs, and the more authentic and less touristy, the better. The hotel clerk looked horrified when I asked him if there was a store or outlet somewhere that sold knockoffs. The desk clerk asserted that we should not go to any such place. They can be dangerous. There are dangerous people there, and they can take advantage of ignorant Americans or Canadians like Mike was. He strongly advised against going anywhere but to the retailers immediately around the safe hotel. Well, I was determined to see the real China, and I had heard that Shanghai had a huge underground, illegal tenderloin district that sold everything that you could want at pennies on the dollar, because the goods were, well, defective from manufacturing, so they were sold cheap through the gray channels, or they were stolen, or excess manufacturing that found its way into gray markets. And lastly, they could just be knockoffs that look identical to the official items, but are made from substandard materials and will likely degrade very quickly or break, or may not even operate as expected. But undaunted, we ignored the hotel desk clerk's caution and advice and asked him to write down the address of the Tenderloin knockoff district and where we might find its entrance. The clerk explained that there was a small area near a mall where things were inexpensive, and that might be where we wanted to go. But he emphasized again, it was dangerous. And then he said, few police there. Few police. Mike and I took our slip of paper with the Tenderloin knockoff address district and proceeded to the taxi that promptly pulled up outside. There were so many taxis that we never had to wait but a few minutes at the hotel for another one to arrive. The taxi looked at our paper and upon reading the address, looked horrified and exclaimed, "No, no go, no," and he drove off. Wow, Mike and I were dismayed that both the desk clerk and the taxi driver were so concerned about our destination that they greatly did not want to see us go there. Being warned by a taxi driver and a hotel clerk not to go to the Tenderloin knockoff district was not enough still to thwart Mike and my intention to obtain knockoff souvenirs. And so we hailed another taxi, and this driver was fine with taking us to the so-called Badlands of retail. The more adventurous taxi drove us perhaps 15 minutes through a wide range of sceneries, dense commercial and retail areas, desperate to medium-scale residential areas, and through a few stretches of open land and trees. We eventually pulled into a crowded outdoor mall area with buildings and alleys all around. Mike and I had narrowly stepped out of the taxi and were rushed by throngs of people with brochures of things that they wanted to sell. Others bellowed, "Girls, girls, Coke, Coke, anything!" We were in the Wild West of the Chinese retail. Mike and I chose one of the barkers and told him that we wanted to buy knockoffs. The street barker showed no fear of engaging with us. Instead, he grinned ear to ear and he exclaimed, "Follow me!" He led us away from the big groups from the outdoor mall and into a very narrow alleyway. It could not have been 4 or 5 feet wide, and the building was many, many stories tall. Although it was daytime, the lighting was twilight with shadows all about. Mike looked worried, and he said he was scared that we were alone in an area that we were warned repeatedly about, and now we were willfully entering a dark alley with a total stranger in search of potentially illegal knockoff merchandise. Mike may have been smart and prudent, but we were here, and I do not surrender my quests. Perhaps midway through the alley, there was a tiny little door, maybe 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide. The Barker retail guide tapped on the door and said something in Chinese. The door opened, and a small woman waved us to go inside. Mike looked alarmed and said, "Are you sure? We could go into that little door and be killed." Just like that, dead, over. "Are you sure?" I nodded and affirmed, "Yeah, of course." Entering the door was a little intimidating, I admit, because it was small and the room inside was dark. But I entered first, and Mike followed, and the small woman closed the door behind us. Once inside the dimly lit room, we could see the walls were lined with shelves of random knockoff watches, shoes, ties, compact discs and DVDs, music and movies. There were some women's purses and men's wallets. The selection seemed small, not at all what I had imagined, but the knockoffs were there. They did not look of high quality either. They looked like knockoffs, and so Mike and I had no interest, in fact, in buying anything there. But Mike was worried that if we did not buy something, maybe they would become upset with us. Maybe they would harm us or mug us even. Mike's fear was pervasive for him, and they could see that I had little to no interest in their merchandise. The small woman leaned over toward us and smiled coyly. You want something else? You want girl? You want me?" "No," Mike muttered sheepishly, shocked, and I replied slowly and likewise, "No, we just want to buy some things. Nothing here is what we want." A man had been sitting in the corner, observing us. I presumed he was a bouncer or a salesman of some sort. Either way, until we had something to buy, or he engaged with us himself, he just sat there, and so we ignored him. But now, suddenly, the bouncer salesman stood up, and he walked to one of the walls. He pulled on it, and the entire wall opened to reveal a corridor behind it. The hallway traversed the entire outer perimeter of the building, and it had a sloping down and then up area of the corridor, apparently crossing underground beneath the street and then up into another building across the way. The entire knockoff district was operating as a literal underground illicit retail operation on a scale larger than most USA malls, when you consider the magnitude of the number of these little dark knockoff shops hidden throughout the facade structures all throughout the underground retailers. Mike and I purchased a few things, like a fashion tote to carry. The other things we bought: watches, computer memory cards, women's purses, and all sorts of little small things. The underbelly retailers were pleased with our purchases, and they let us outside once more. Outside, we had no idea where to go. There were no taxis in this part of town, it seemed, and so we were two white Americans wandering the native streets of Shanghai, each carrying a suitcase-sized knockoff tote bag filled with knickknacks. We saw crazy things. A Lamborghini Countach parked across the street from a huge, shiny windowed skyscraper, and next to the Lamborghini was a decrepit rickshaw. The contrast of income disparity was beyond anything I had ever seen in the USA, UK, or Canada. And no gas stations. They were all underground with only pump handles visible at street level. Grocery stores sold exotic food that seemed incomprehensible from an American perspective to eat. When away from the knockoff district, a woman desperate to clean my sneakers, as if they were dress shoes, on the street, ran up to me. She did not wait for my approval to clean my shoes. She just started washing them. But a police officer saw it and ran up and chased her away. He told me not to let locals do things for me. He said she could be a criminal. Well, it was not clear to me if the policeman was more upset with Mike and I for letting the woman do something or with the woman for doing something. Either way, we moved on. One particularly short Chinese couple saw Mike towering so tall above them that they ran up and asked if Mike would pose with them while I took a photo, because he was 6.5 feet tall and I doubt they were 5 feet tall. Well, I obliged and took the photo, and did the same for Mike, who also wanted a photo for his own nostalgia. Like I say, the height contrast was so extreme, maybe barely 5 feet versus almost 7 feet. The giant next to the thin dwarves. Well, we came across an indoor mall as we wandered, and we decided to head in. We imagined there might be a phone or an information desk that would allow us to call a taxi. Inside, it was clean but cluttered. Just like the USA, there were ATMs to get cash. Everything was familiar, just like an American or Canadian or British mall. I suppose malls worldwide were largely the same. The salespeople were seemingly desperate, though. The first booth store that we approached and left without finding anything of interest to buy resulted in the saleswoman chasing us outside the store and offering to lower the prices on anything and everything. Just say what we wanted and make an offer. There was a huge difference. Everything apparently, prices were negotiable. The selection of merchandise was far greater than the knockoff underbelly district, but they were much more expensive and they did not bear the alleged high fashion brands or logos. The stuff sold in the mall were normal, everyday things. Mike and I were about to leave the last store when a surprise happened. A salesman looked at us and he said, "You seem okay, yeah? You okay?" Well, I answered, "Yeah, we are okay." He furthered, "You not police, not police. You police, are you?" Surprised, I answered, "No, we are not police." He leaned over to the wall, and just like the underbelly knockoff fake walls, so was this wall a fake. It opened to reveal a recessed second wall, which was lined with knockoffs. But these knockoffs looked nice and they were of high quality. Other retailers observed us buying something from the hidden knockoff wall, and they pursued us to likewise show their knockoff walls and hoped that we buy from them. One after another, secret walls and hidden panels opened and revealed more and more secret, illicit goods to purchase. Mike and I did buy more things, and our totes were full of knickknacks and stuff. Mike and I made another trip on a different day to visit a Chinese silk factory and shop. The factory offered a tour on how silk was made from silkworms. It was interesting to see the process of extracting silk from worms and processing it and weaving it into various garments and blankets. I purchased a kimono for my wife, Catherine, and myself, and I bought a king-size comforter and sheet. They were great quality and incredibly soft, and of course, silky. After a dinner with Virtuos, they asked Mike and I to go to a local nightclub to see how Chinese partied. There were too many people to go in a single car, so the company's attending staff and Mike would take several taxis. We had Chinese and English-speaking people with us to make sure that we got to the club without communication problems. Our taxi driver got lost and went on the wrong road and entered a freeway, headed in the opposite direction. The Chinese-speaking Virtuos passenger, upset, yelled at the driver in Mandarin. The taxi driver panicked and he stopped the car to look at a map. Yeah, we stopped. We stopped in the middle of the freeway at nighttime. Cars swerved all around us at insane freeway speeds. It must have been a miracle that evening. The taxi driver was able to resume driving and took us to the nightclub. We did not crash and no one hit us. We lived. We made it. It was nuts. Pure and simple. It was a miracle. I had to wonder, was this normal for China? Was this an insane anomaly? Would I ever know? When asked how Virtuos made decisions and prioritized work, especially since they contracted with many companies, not just potentially with us, Virtuos' founder happily shared over their dinner with us that he was the final say in the company. And if we had any concerns or issues, that he would be our go-to to resolve all things to our satisfaction. He was extremely accommodating, and he exuded confidence. I pressed further, though, that I did not understand how things worked in China. I told him that I did not know China's laws or the regulations working with Canadian or United States corporations, or how contracts might have differences or nuances. And of course, Electronic Arts had people with external contract experience, including working with groups in China, but I did not have that experience, and neither did Mike. And besides, I had learned over time not to trust the way things have been done, or the people that did the things the way they have always been done. I had to confirm and verify everything myself. It became a hallmark of mine to honor Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev's trust but verify mantra. And so I examined and assessed everything myself. No schedule, no company, no feature, no hardware or firmware did not have me deeply involved in assessing and providing related strategic plans. Virtuos' founder conceded that actually China controls everything. Indeed, he acknowledged China assigned a native Chinese citizen as a company director who had total authority over Virtuos and its staff and its business. The Chinese company director only observes unless something is done that violates Chinese laws or objectives. Virtuos' founder would make virtually all decisions, but it was possible to be overridden. Virtuos' office building appeared newly constructed and was impressive in size, and it was extremely well maintained and clean. The staff were educated, and those that spoke English explained how they were lieutenants, being translator buffers with the non-English speaking Chinese team. It turned out that Virtuos' office building was provided by China free of cost because the building was an extension of a Chinese university that was dedicated to training video game and art and audio development skills. That's right. The so-called private contract company was classified as a course under a never-heard-of Chinese university, which meant it benefited from Chinese education grants and facilities and free student staff. Virtuos being a Chinese university extension seemed to me like a sham, but they passed our due diligence as an art studio. They failed as an engineering or full game development group, but they were close. We could likely have shored up their engineering holes, but working in China seemed too much and too complex for our engineering modularity to succeed at. Ultimately, Virtuos provided asset and coding services for companies throughout the world, and in doing so, grew its database and network of contacts and experts and business leaders globally. Virtuos was also a leech line into technologists, artists, and business leaders worldwide, while gaining access to use and clone their technologies, human-machine interface HMI, and game designs, and even assets. Sometimes with even minor tweaks, they just copied art or audio. We caught them double selling the same assets they made for us to other groups. Virtuos likewise sought to import, experience, cultural designs from different territories throughout the world. Their goal was to ensure that Chinese-made games would feel like Western-made games, to appeal to non-Chinese markets. China could influence video game designs and cultural concepts if it delivered highly popular, globally relevant games. For reference, Tencent is one of the biggest and most successful Chinese video game companies in the world. So what's the bottom line? Virtuos was a Chinese government extension to harvest technology and build a network of people to support their eventual independent making and publishing of their own software and games. Virtuos was not just a company doing work. Virtuos was not an innocent enterprise. Virtuos was a Chinese-controlled company.